All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Sebastian Faber. I'm with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you to our fifth or sixth, I think, film discussion. Um, these have been so much fun to do, and it's been really great to invite colleagues and friends to lead some of these. Today, we're incredibly lucky to have Professor Alex Vernon of Hendrix College in Arkansas with us. Um, Alex is an expert in the work of Hemingway, um, but that's not the only thing he does. Just a little over a week ago, he published a biography of Tim O'Brien called Peace is a Shy Thing, The Life and Art of Tim O'Brien, that got a glowing review in the New York Times a couple days ago. So, and then on top of that, Alex has published two books pertaining to the topic of today's discussion. He published Hemingway's Second War, which is about Hemingway's coverage as a journalist and his involvement with the Spanish Civil War, including The Spanish Earth, the film shot by Joris Ivens, the Dutch documentary maker. And then just 14 months ago or so, he published an extensive glossary or commentary on the novel For Whom the Bell Tolls, where he really goes page by page and runs us through all the background and the details and the changes in the manuscript. So it's an incredibly interesting and rich book. And now he just published the biography on Tim O'Brien. Um, a couple of household things as usual. This is recorded, um, but only the parts in which we're all together are recorded. We'll put you in breakout rooms for a little bit. That part is not recorded. We will post this on YouTube in case you want to view it again or share it with friends who can't make it today. But if you don't want your voice or face visible on YouTube, but you do have questions, then in the Q&A, you can post your question in the chat, and you can indicate to Dennis, if he selects your question, that you prefer that he ask it for you so you don't appear. On the other hand, if you have your question, you want to pose it yourself, you'll get the chance to unmute and pose your question yourself. The order of events today will be, after my short introduction, I'll give it over to Alex Vernon, who will talk a little bit more about the film and who will sort of like formulate a couple of big questions that will again send you to discuss off into your breakout rooms. And then once we get back together, every group um, will have one person to report a little bit on what you guys talked about, and then we'll take it from there and go into the Q&A. We're going to try to finish up at the very latest at 6:30 Eastern time. But if it turns out that we're kind of wrapping up a little bit earlier, then we'll wrap up a little bit, but we'll close a little bit earlier. But at the very latest, we'll be here until 6:30. A couple of other things. We have a couple of upcoming events that I'll mention again at the end of the meeting, but I thought I'd throw them out now too. On June 25th, we have an online event at, let me check here, at 3 p.m. It's a little bit earlier than usual because we have people from Spain joining. This is going to be our annual Pride event to celebrate Pride Month. We're incredibly privileged to have a Spanish senator with us, Carla Antonelli, the first trans person to be in the trans woman to be in the Spanish Senate from the Canary Islands. So we'll have a conversation with her, and she'll be with us live to answer your questions about the role that the LGBTQ plus movement has played in the fight against Francoism and later in the expansion and establishment of Spanish democracy. So that's going to be on June 25th at 3 p.m. online. And then our next film is on July 24th at 4 p.m. I'll be doing that myself, and we're going to be talking about The Fallen Sparrow, 1943 film with John Garfield in the main role, where John Garfield plays the role of a recently returned veteran of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade with his kind of share of PTSD, who gets involved in a kind of noir-ish plot involving a Nazi spy ring. So that's a super interesting film, and I invite you to join that discussion on July 24th at 4 p.m. online. All right, enough intro. I'm going to hand it over to Alex Vernon. Alex, thank you so much for being with us. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. This is fun. I've been looking forward to this for a while now. And thanks everyone for being here. I don't know about where you all are in the world. I'm in Arkansas, and in Arkansas, it was in the low 80s today, a gorgeous day. And so wherever you all are, you've chosen to be here on this evening. So I really appreciate you all choosing to spend an hour and a half with us today too. Um, a couple of apologies right off the bat. One is I'm a literature guy, as Sebastian mentioned. I mean, most of my scholarship is in war literature, a little bit of film. So I'm sure there are film scholars, film experts out there. So my apologies to you that I'm going to sort of fake it, right, and pretend to be a film scholar today as I talk about this film. And my other apology, which to the ALBA crowd, I'm a Hemingway guy. And I know that there's some sensitivity to Hemingway a little bit. When the novel came out, when From the Bell Tolls came out in 1940, the Veterans Abraham Lincoln Brigade were very vocal in their displeasure about the novel. They thought Hemingway betrayed them. He showed some of the warts of the Republic, right? He showed the massacres and some of the cruelty on the Republican side. He had a couple of fascist characters to whom the novel was very sympathetic. He spoke badly about La Pasionera, the communist spokesperson for the Spanish Communist Party, right? So a lot of brigaders were not happy with that book. And I know even today there's still some people who just think, "Oh my gosh, why Hemingway? Like, can we be done with Hemingway in the Spanish Civil War?" But of course, point of fact is he is many people's entree to the Spanish Civil War, and so at least we can perhaps recognize that. And I think the novel is absolutely brilliant and amazing. It's got some weird things going on with it, but we're here, of course, to talk about the film. 1943, Paramount Pictures, directed by Sam Wood, with a script by Dudley Nichols, and Hemingway reviewed a couple of versions of the script as Nichols was preparing it and gave him some feedback on that script. It was shot in Sonora, California in 1942 before it came out in 1943. Um, Mixed reviews from the critics, but it was nominated for 9 Oscars, including Best Picture, and won one Oscar for the Pilar actress who won Best Supporting Actress for that role, Katina Paxidou. I think she was a Greek actress too. If you're curious, there was another film version of the novel, a teleplay in 1959 by CBS. It was aired over 2 nights. So a teleplay, it was live, right? And they filmed it. Jason Robards plays Robert Jordan, probably a little old for the part. That's okay. The Maria character was played by an Austrian Swiss actress. So once again, we're actually avoiding Spanish actresses to play the part of Maria in that one. You can see that on YouTube, the 2 parts. It's a little bit grainy on YouTube, and you have to even be more, I think, more patient than watching the 1943 film version. But it's there if you are curious to watch that. So Hemingway went to Spain 4 times during the war to cover it for North American Newspaper Alliance, which is a wire service. He was on the Republican side the whole time. He went because he loved Spain ever since he first traveled in the 1920s to cover the bullfights. He went to raise funds for an ambulance corps, right, for the Republic. He went because he was falling in love or was about to pursue an affair with Martha Gellhorn, who was also going to cover the war with him. And what he would say in his writings too, in some of his letters, was he went to prevent the US. He was in an isolationist mood, and he had known for a while now that a second World War was probably coming. And so he thought maybe with his correspondence, he could help, even though he was trying to get people to support Spain, as many of the premature fascists, anti-fascists said, they wanted to stop fascism in Spain. They did not want the second World War to break out. And he was in some ways, with his correspondence, hoping to keep the US out of a global war, right? So when he starts this book, he starts writing this book, and he starts writing it on March 1st, 1939. He's kind of in an isolationist mood. I think that's sort of important to think about too. So starts at March 1st, 1939, published it October 21st, 1940. The other sort of interesting thing about this, so he starts it right in 1939, right like weeks before the end of the Spanish Civil War. He's writing it when World War II breaks out. He's still fairly isolationist, but when the movie's being made, 1942, 1943, at that point, he's on board. Right? The U.S. has been dragged into the war after Pearl Harbor, and he is cruising the Caribbean on his fishing boat, hunting for German submarines. Right? I was actually thinking about that this morning, and his crew on the Pilar, the name of his boat, also, right? The name of the character, his crew is mostly Cubans. So here we have this gringo with a bunch of Cubans on this boat called the Pilar. Let's get this guerrilla operation. I mean, it's so strange how this maps onto the plot of the novel in a weird kind of way, right? That here's Hemingway, like Robert Jordan, the white man trying to save the day in this weird scene too. So quick word about the title of the novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls. It is very often read as this sort of call for the U.S. to enter the war, right? For ask not from the bell tolls for thee. Come over, come to Europe, help save us, right? And even die for the cause. I think that's a gross misreading, and I think that's a misreading based on the film because the film comes out in 1943 during the war, and the film comes out amidst that sort of first wave of Hollywood propaganda pro-war films. Of course, that title comes out of John Donne's Meditation 17. John Donne writes that when he's really sick and he's thinking about killing himself, actually. And the line in the Meditation 17 is basically he's thinking, if I die, it's going to matter. It's going to matter to you. It's a very egotistical thing. Like he's contemplating dying and he wants to assure himself that on his death, the rest of the world will feel his death. That's the source of the title, right? So to think about it as this kind of geopolitical call to arms that people often read it, I think is kind of, I mean, maybe that's a little bit there. I mean, he did come up with the title after Germany invaded Poland, okay, but still, I think the John Donne epigraph. We think we need to go there to really sort of think about the title of that. And the last thing I'll say by way of introduction to is so I taught this book a couple of times. I think the first time for me, the kind of aha moment where I really started to wrap my head around how weird this book is. And I'd like to read really quickly a passage from the novel where I sort of like, what on earth is happening? And how did I never notice this before in this book? This is right after Robert Jordan and Maria have made love for the first time. And this is right after they made the earth move in that famous language from the novel. And it's just all his interiority. Spanish girls make wonderful wives. I've never had one, so I should know. And when I get back to my job at the university, she can be an instructor's wife. And when undergraduates who take Spanish 4 come in to smoke pipes in the evening and have those so valuable informal discussions about Quevedo, Lope de Vega, Galdós, and the other always admirable dead, Maria can tell them about how some of the blue-shirted crusaders for the true faith sat on her head while others twisted her arms and pulled her skirts up and stuffed them in her mouth. I wonder how they will like Maria in Missoula, Montana. This is many chapters before she actually recounts the story of her gang sexual violation, right? And he has this weird fantasy of having her repeat what happened to her as entertainment for his undergraduates. And I remember reading that and just thinking, what on earth? Like, how did I never notice this before? And that's the moment when, again, I sort of thought, okay, I need to really think much harder about this book and this protagonist too. So discussion breakout sessions. So the things to think about in your groups, and I'm not in charge of making that. Somebody else is going to make that technical magic happen. But a few questions to bat around. And I don't know, some of you may have read the novel 20 years ago, last week, I don't know. But do think about, to the extent that you can, the differences between the novel and the film. And if you haven't read the novel in a long time, you can still probably imagine, what film adaptations are all about. So let's have a conversation about the differences. And for those people who know the novel fairly well, you can kind of be the teacher, right, for your discussion group to think about those differences. And also, secondly, which is a really interesting question to me, especially given this is a Spanish Civil War film that came out in 1943 when World War II is raging. Think about the politics of the film. Like, what are the film's politics, particularly regarding Spain? This is supposed to be about the Spanish Civil War, not about World War II. So how does the film, or how does it fail to engage what you know about the political and historical situation that it is purportedly depicting? And then lastly, what about Spain and Spanish culture? This is a book in Spain. Robert Jordan says, I wish I were Spanish. And he speaks Spanish. He's a Spanish instructor. How does the film depict Spanishness, if that's a word that I can use, right? How does it treat Spanishness, and how does it sort of depict it? And is that depiction okay? Is it kind of a little bit problematic? Which, and that's probably a very leading question. I think it is problematic. But how does it deal with Spanishness, right? So, film versus the book, the politics of the film, especially the Spanish politics, but also we can talk about the World War II politics of it as well, and the way in which the film changes, right, to sort of focus on the new war, and then the Spanishness, the depiction of Spanishness in the film. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so absolutely. Three questions: novel versus film, the politics, and the depiction of Spain and Spaniards and Spanish culture. Um, so Dennis is gonna divide you up into probably about six groups. Um, for each group, at one point in your discussion, maybe think about who is the best person or who is most willing to report back and sort of keep track of what people are talking about and summarize it back to the main group once we get back. And then let's do 15 or 20 minutes. Is that, I'm looking at faces, just those of you, does it sound okay? 15 minutes? And then we'll check in after 15. If you need more time, we'll give you more time kind of thing. So we can start with group one. Not sure who was the person.
Group one, we have Paige. You'd like to report
Okay.
on what you
Yeah, I
spoke
didn't know.
about.
I didn't know what group we were. Okay. We had I think 9 or 10 of us, and one thing just after to my that warmed my heart was Mr. Hartman. I don't know what your first name is. His mother was a nurse in Spain, so and I've been writing about nurses, so that was a nice little connection about
Peter Hartman, Hartsburg.
yeah, Peter. Yes. We we kind of all thought that the film was theatrical and low on really a political, an accurate political depiction of the Civil War, that it was made in the context of World War II, 1943. People were talking about how theatrical it was, that it felt more like a stage setting than a movie, and that this is, I guess, connected to the Spanishness of it, that the actors were all heavily made up and they looked kind of overdone, including in the close-ups. One of the points was that the film was really made to be a hit with two, important stars, and that kind of, shifted the political value of the film, I think. And someone noted that the film trivializes the war. We all noted that there's really no reference to the international brigades in it, except that Robert Jordan has gone behind the lines, and there's really not much connection to his brothers in the brigade. So the we really let's see. And in terms of the location, the film was made in the Sierra Nevadas of the U.S., not in the. Of course, it couldn't be made in Spain at that point. But and that actually the location, there would be no caves like the ones that they lived in the real part of Spain. But Hemingway got that wrong. But we kind of said, well, that's all right. That's not a problem with the novel. And it's a love story, um, with this speeded up intimacy, which is both in the film and the novel. And somebody noted that the novel was a little bit slow and boring, and someone suggested, is war boring? And we didn't say this, but I think the times between the battles were actually really boring for many of the soldiers in the brigade. So, and I don't know if I've left out just that we thought the film didn't really get to the heart of the politics. Oh, and the fact that the Soviets are portrayed very critically. Um, we we noted that's one reason that there were communists involved in the in the Spanish Civil War, there's maybe one reason that people don't know anything about the Spanish Civil War, and that this film doesn't really inform you. But Hemingway was critical of the Reds, or the Soviet Reds, and it's in both the novel and the film. But well, I'll leave it at that. What else am I leaving out? Group one.
Oh, thank you, Paige. I don't know if Sebastian, Alex, do you have anything to expand upon with their statements?
Alex, right
I
here.
mean, it depends on how much. I mean, were we waiting till the end, or I'm happy to pipe in at any time?
Yeah, you can pipe in a little bit now, and then we'll just go to the next group.
Yeah, that I mean, everything that Paige said, I was in group one, and I tried to just be, a wallflower for that conversation too. Everything Paige said and some of the other group members said is more reason to read the novel.
Right.
Right. I mean, you're totally right. In my reading, the film really does not do a whole lot with the politics of the war. And what is to some people boring about the novel is it goes in depth into the politics of the war. Robert Jordan is a communist. There are
Right.
moments in which he is busting on the socialist leadership of the republic. It is very much about the war. There are moments in the film that do that a little bit, and they're pretty subtle. So, for example, at one point when Andres is trying to get the mission to stop, he's trying to get the offensive to stop, and he goes to the radio operator, and the radio operator can't get hold of General Goltz, and Captain Gomez says, "Can you just call the airfield?" And he's like, "Well, if I did, I'm gonna get shot." Um, Earlier, when El Sordo says, "Robert Jordan, doing this at dawn is stupid. Can you do it at night?" And Robert Jordan says, "I would be shot for that." There are other scenes when somebody says, "You're the kind of person who's going to get exterminated after the war." I mean, there are moments in the film that do get after some of the
Right.
problematic parts, and problematic an understatement, right, of what was happening in that. And the love story thing I think is really complicated. It's even in the film, he touches her hair a lot, and we remember her story, and the hair, she was shaved before she was raped. And so in the novel, essentially, the holding her down to shave her becomes a substitute for describing the rape, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that he is always touching her hair and fetishizing this is strange. And in the film, she talks about being raped twice. Both those times lead to passionate kisses and fade out. It's right after the descriptions of her rape that suddenly we get the lovemaking scene, the implied lovemaking scenes.
Wow.
That's really bizarre to me,
Yeah.
right? And so it's little things like that. And also, I've got plenty to say, but I want to sort of hear from the other group leaders. But things like that, which to me make the movie, which I agree is not a good movie, but it's still really interesting, and it's interesting in what it doesn't do, or slight changes that it makes to the
Yeah.
novel.
Yeah, that kind of connects to the stuff that we talked about in group two, and I'll be as brief as I can. But we ended up touching on much of the same things that Paige mentioned. But we entered like trying to think like what was conventional and what was possible in Hollywood at the time. We already know that the novel was bound by the restrictions of literary publishing at the time in the US. Like particular things couldn't be talked about. There were decency standards. Um, but the same is true or stronger, much more of films, right? And um, Rachel mentioned the Hayes office, right? So the federal government oversaw what script development, storylines, dialogue, um, that included not just like the kind of decency stuff that we're now used to in terms of a rating system, but also diplomatic consequences, like foreign relations, like you don't want to offend foreign governments, you don't want to offend Rachel said, business leaders, right? There's all kinds of restrictions. So, and then the conventions, right? So the heavily made up ethnic characters that the Spaniards become in the movie are not all that different from how people from other parts of the world are depicted in Hollywood at the time. Right? So that and then the politics of it too, like between World War II, the restrictions of what could be said and done, the politics are flattened completely in the movie, except really for that one segment that we put in the intro film where Jordan teaches the Spaniards, like your war is about this other bigger thing that you don't even know, right? So, and the other thing that we talked about a bit was kind of the casting, which puts a real like hierarchy between Ingrid Bergman, Gary Cooper, and all the rest. That is then emphasized by the morality of characters other than Cooper and Bergman and the way they speak English, right? Which is also a Hollywood convention, right? Like we know they're supposed to be speaking Spanish, and then as a result, they speak English in a Spanish way. But that kind of doesn't help the equity between Gary Cooper, the American hero who comes in to save the day, and his sometimes slightly shifty, otherwise a little bit clownish Spanish sidekicks, right? So that is rubs a bit the wrong way. Um, I think that's more or less what we covered.
All right, great. Thank you, Sebastian. Kathy, I have you as the leader of group three, if you're able to
Yeah. Hi.
tell us.
Okay. So we pretty much followed the three questions. So the differences between the movie and the book, one is the age actually of the characters. Apparently in the book, they're about 18 years old. But in the movie, because they wanted Gary Cooper, he's like in his 40s or something. And even the Maria seemed older than 18. So that was one difference. Another difference, and I didn't know this, but a guy who read the book recently, I mean, it's just the setting. The movie, the setting was rock based, the caves and the rocks and the mountain. In the book, they're in the forest. So, okay, I didn't know that. And then about the politics, um, well, I thought that the politics, I don't know if this is true, but favored the Republicans. But there was a villainous Spanish character who was always drunk. I don't know his name. And he was on both sides. He kept going from helping the Republicans and feeling bad and then doing things for the other side. He was, I don't know. And also, well, we talked about the Soviet Union was the only country that supported the Republican Spain. That wasn't, I don't know if that was really in the movie or, um, and also I found out that Hemingway hated communism. I didn't realize that. Okay. Third question, the culture, Spain and the Spanish culture. So somebody said that women in that culture had to be helping somebody. Oh no, had to belong to a man. And also women had to be escorted. They couldn't sort of go off on their own. So, yeah, and I guess you saw that in the movie. And then this was a big thing in number three. The bonding between Pilar and Maria was amazing. It was a strong feminist relationship that struck some of us. And yeah, there was that rugged individualism. Yep, that's pretty much. Now, did anybody in my group, do you want to say something else that I forgot? I don't know. Okay.
So that's great. Thanks. A couple quick notes. So Maria is 19 in the novel, but Robert Jordan is older. He's like in his late 30s in the novel, right? So
Oh,
so
he
that's
is.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so
I mean, for a while, like 10 years ago, I used to think you should have Brad Pitt and Penelope Cruz like to do the remake. But even then, Penelope Cruz was too old for the role.
yeah.
Although Brad Pitt would have worked for it too. Robert Jordan in the novel is a communist, right? He in a draft he said that out loud because Hemingway was trying to get this book to the Book of the Month Club. He took that out because he wouldn't sell the Book of the Month Club, right? But if you read carefully, if you read his descriptions of Robert Jordan's actions before the novel takes place, the units he's fighting with, the battles he's fighting, the places he is, it's pretty clear he's hanging out with the communists.
Okay.
He's criticizing the Republican leadership. He's criticizing the socialists, right? So it's interesting to think about, given Hemingway's attitude toward the communists, why is his hero a communist too?
Yeah.
Totally fascinating. And the last thing about you mentioned about Pilar and Maria's bond, which is very affectionate, very very kind of maternal. In the novel, it's also weirdly sexual. The
Oh,
Pilar's discussion of the way that she wants that she's jealous of she's jealous of Jordan and Maria's romance. I mean, there's a lot of touching that reads more erotic than it does maternal. So and he muted that in the final version. The draft was much more explicit about the kind of homoeroticism between Pilar and Maria, which just yet another level of complexity that the novel has that the film just elides completely.
Thank you. Great. I'm gonna
Um, Great. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. Okay. David, I believe you are our group four person. If you'd like to say what your group discussed, we very much appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So we mostly focus on questions 2 and 3. The question about politics, we thought it was a pretty simplistic portrayal of the politics. It kind of hinged on the one Robert Jordan speech about fascism, and I was kind of struck by kind of the facelessness of the enemy. It didn't really delve it didn't really delve in any way to what, any of the ideologies or what the factions were, and it was just kind of like, oh, this force that we need to fight against. It was kind of a simplistic good and evil type of thing. And then I think we had the most productive discussion about question 3 about um, the role of Spanish culture in the film, and we thought that it basically had no interest in Spanish culture, really. It was kind of more using it as a backdrop for the two things that they wanted to do, which was number one, the love story between the two big movie stars, and then number two, the kind of the message of, this film inextricably being tied to exactly when it was made, kind of the message about politics. So, and Spain just served in that way as the backdrop. We were kind of wondering people, if Americans knew more about the Spanish Civil War than people watching it today. And we also touched on um, the politics of women, and we did mention that line as well. Where I think the first thing Robert Jordan asks is, "Oh, does she belong to you, to someone, or to you?" Um, and we also pointed out that I think the kind of drunk, I think what Pablo, I think maybe his name was. We were kind of thinking about how that portrayal of why was that guy in charge of the group. It was kind of like it really, makes it look worse that the kind of white, the white character comes in and immediately takes over because the other guy's so incompetent and drunk, and they're squabbling all the time, and it just is not a great look. I think we had a couple of questions that we wanted to maybe bring up. I don't know if now's the time for that, but one was about what were the criticisms from the Abraham Lincoln Brigade about this movie, like either first when it came out or over time, and then also what what were Hemingway's interactions with the filmmakers, and what objections did he have, if any, to, you know, the film as it came out or the script or whatever. So.
Thanks. I mean, to address some of those really quickly, with the Spanishness, it's interesting. I think this series has already done The Devil's Backbone and Guillermo del Toro's film, which del Toro initially envisioned to be set during the Mexican Revolution, and then switched it to the Spanish Civil War. So it's really sort of interesting question about that film setting. In this film, there's that weird. So there's the opening scene where Robert Jordan kills his fellow guerrilla when they're dynamiting it, and then we go to Madrid, and that Madrid scene where he meets Goltz, he walks into this cafe, and the cafe has a flamenco dancer and a bunch of murals on the walls of bullfighters, and then it goes to the rest of the movie. I mean, that is totally a invented scene for the movie, and that seems to be, oh, we're in Spain because we've got flamenco and bullfighting, and now let's go see the romance part of it too, right? So I agree that the film is very strange about Spanishness too. In the novel, Pablo, I don't know that I would say he's more sympathetic, but he's more complicated in the novel. And the novel gives him credit for being right, that if they do this, this bridge mission, they're probably all going to die. Like he is much more shrewd, and the novel gives him more credence to his cleverness, right? Than the film does. In the film, he's almost comic relief villain somehow, but not so much in the novel. And then the questions about Hemingway's, and I don't know about the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, the veterans' response to the film. They did not like the novel at all. I don't know about the response to the film, and the film is so its own thing. Hemingway did look at a version of the script that Dudley Nichols wrote, and had some issues with dialogue. A lot of that dialogue got changed per Hemingway. He even so in the typescript, Andre Marty, the French International Brigade Commissar, he was in the typescript. Does not make the final film, but Hemingway said you can keep Marty in the film, but change his name, which I think is really interesting because in the novel, Andre Marty, his name is there, right? But for some reason, Hemingway insisted on changing his name. And what Hemingway said too about the script anyway, there were three things the film could do: show why a man would die for a cause, talk about the romance, and do the combat. And he said the script only did the combat well. The other two parts of what this film should do, it did not do particularly well. I don't know how many groups we have to go.
One moment. I think we have two more groups. Group 5. Hillary, you would like to report what Group 5 did? Very much appreciated. You should be on mute now.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for hosting these. Very interesting. We had a lot of folks joining who hadn't read both the film and then or seen both the film and read the novel recently. So we kind of skipped that question. We did talk a lot about the depiction of Spanish culture, the caves, the skin tone, also the portrayal of the gypsy character as actually one of the lighter skin actors. To me, I was very interested that sort of the Spanish actors were all mostly Eastern European. It was just kind of like darkness. We talked a lot about the white savior issue and also the portrayal of women, the kind of the manhandling of Maria that's been mentioned. One thing that stood out was Pilar's soliloquy about being ugly, and we were wondering if that was a Hemingway dialogue or the screenwriters, and what does ugly mean? And then we were lucky to have, some expert filmmakers in the group as well who talked about techniques and how most of the film is really in your face close-ups and shallow depth of field, especially on Bergman. And the rocks are kind of abstract. Everyone's in close proximity, and it adds a kind of urgency to every interaction and kind of makes the film for me, the film felt very dated, but for our sort of in the terms of filmmaking technique, that techniques alleviated the concerns about characterization. Yeah, and then and definitely we talked also about this idea of the speeded up intimacy. We didn't get so much to the politics of the film. I just wanted to mention that I think a lot about the scene. I believe it's El Sordo when they're up on the sort of nest before they get bombed, and they kind of agree to take out this cruel commander. They call him out, and they know that by calling him out, they're all going to die. And from what I know about the Spanish Civil War, that this kind of the idea of certain like extremely cruel commanders and this kind of vicious need for revenge or hunger for revenge. So that scene, in terms of how combat's portrayed, that scene definitely sticks out to me. But yeah, we have a member of the group from the Hemingway Letters Project and also from Oak Park, Illinois, where the Hemingway Foundation is located. So a lot of great expertise in the group. Thank you so much.
So to your first question, that's the conversation about Pilar talking about how ugly she is. I mean, it's not verbatim from the novel, but yes, I mean that is there is that scene in the novel where she is talking about how ugly she is, and Pilar and Jordan both say, "Oh no, you're not, you're not." It's much more extensive in the novel. The El Sordo scene is interesting too, because so in the film, there's the one character who says, "I'm not going up there," right? That you're gonna get shot, you're an idiot. In the novel, that character, Lieutenant Paco Berendo, is treated really sympathetically. And actually he's very kind. He's very Catholic, but he's very humble. And he's treated quite well. And that was essentially one of the objections to the from the veterans was, here's this fascist, and you're treating him like a decent human being. You can't do that, as if there are no decent people on the other side of a war somehow. And he plays a much more prominent role in the novel, and suggests how complex Hemingway portrayed all of that.
Great. Okay. And I think that brings us to our final group wrap up, which was group 6. And that is Stacy. Stacy, if you could share with us what your group talked about, that would be much appreciated.
Of course, first of all, I'd like to just love it, all the comments, and it was so fascinating. I'd like to be here for another 3 hours if we could. We kind of started out with how we came to the film. And so interestingly, both Joe and Peter have fathers that were vets from the war. So we think that was really interesting that they're coming to that from that. In fact, and then also, I think Michelle said Michelle's family is from Spain and father was a priest. So we really come to that. And then we had another one, John, who's a writer who taught the book and said he had to give the students a variety of what they could choose from. And they chose From the Bell Tolls because they thought they could watch the movie instead. That was hilarious. Um, then we spent quite a bit of time. I know the time's getting short, and I really would love to have have Alex address the whole idea of how we talk the language and the use of the obscenities and the way that Hemingway tried to portray the Spanish language and the Spanish obscenities, and how so many scholars have and people that just come to the book like, we don't get that, and we've all talked that a little bit. So I'd love to have a more discussion with that from Alex. And at the very end, also, we talked a little bit about the politics. I mentioned that Hemingway was not happy with the fact that they didn't use the word fascist. They used phalangist or phalanges instead. And I know in his letters to Nichols, he expressed and a lot of times there's an article. I know that in one scene where after Maria's head's been shaved and they're taking to her father's office, she steps over a dead body, and he says, they have to know that it was a union worker, because they have to know why the union worker was killed, because he was a union worker. So that's more about the politics. But in the end, we kind of figured that, he did the best he could considering the audience and what the audience would or would not know. So I think if anyone else from my group has any more to say, but that's kind of some of what we got.
I mean, one quick thought, Stacy, about the language question. I don't want to talk a whole lot about the language in the novel because we're talking about the film. But certainly, so in the novel, like the group in both novel and film, the group talk about escaping this site to go to the Gredos Mountains, right? In the novel, Robert Jordan says the Gredos, and the Spaniards just say, we go to Gredos. And some scholars have chimed in and said, oh, Hemingway was inconsistent. Actually, he wrote in letters, no, Robert Jordan got it wrong. Like this was a moment in which the novel is suggesting that Jordan is not that expert in Spain, because he doesn't actually know that you would leave out the article. You would just, if you're actually there local, you would just say, we go to Gredos. But and the film has both Spaniards and Robert Jordan saying the Gredos. Right. So it's a moment where the film kind of gets it wrong, in a sense, gets wrong something very subtle that Robert Jordan does. I mean, other subtleties. At one point in the film, Maria and Robert both fantasize about getting married. In the novel, Maria says no. Like, marriage is the church, and that is the Catholic Church. I am not getting married. Right. In his head, Robert Jordan says, so in one chapter, Robert Jordan says, we should get married. She says no. Then she describes the rape. And in that description, she says, the Valahi who are raping me said, "We are going to make you a bride of the Red Christ." At the end of that same chapter, Robert Jordan says, "She doesn't want to get married. I'm going to marry her in a church anyway." Like there's a really bizarre way in which what he wants of her is kind of sort of fascist. And it's like that the novel kind of suggests that, right? But this is all my way of saying, please read the novel. It
Yeah.
is so subtle and so rich in ways that the film just absolutely is not. And the biggest difference is the novel is, as those of you who've read it know, it's 90%, even though it's third person, it's 90% inside Robert Jordan's head. In the film, you just get Gary Cooper's flat face and you don't know all the things that Robert Jordan is anguishing about. His father's suicide, his grandfather was a Civil War hero. How does he live with both of those legacies as he lives out his life in the Spanish Civil War? I mean, all these complexities to Robert Jordan, the novel, are just absent in this film, which just to some degree, as some people in my group said, in group one said, it really is just to put Gary Cooper and Ingrid Bergman up on screen with their pretty faces really big.
Yeah.
All to look after, right? Look at.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody. Those are really sound like really great productive discussions. We have a little bit of time left to maybe answer a couple of questions from the Q&A. Dennis, do you have anything that jumps out that we haven't covered yet?
I think, well, I mean, please put your questions in the chat, and I'll get to them and we can ask a few of them. But I'll start with just asking one that I saw in here. I'll just gonna ask it and direct it to Sebastian and Alex here. Is that um were okay, so yeah, were Hemingway and Orwell critical of the Stalinists while also supporting the Republic? Like how did they square that circle, do you think? I think is the question there. This is from Patrick. Um, would that be, well, I think we could start there. Then please, if you have questions, put them in the chat and I can call on you from there.
That's a complicated one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, so Orwell and Hemingway, like both were outsiders, both came in. In both cases, they didn't have a full understanding of what was happening in Spain, right? So Orwell didn't quite speak Spanish, Hemingway did speak Spanish, some, but both of them came with their with their own ideological baggage, right? Orwell becomes like lives like sort of joins a militia. He never joins the International Brigade. He joins the militia of the POUM and ends up kind of caught in the power struggle between the Republican authorities, including the Communist Party, and the Pumistas and the anarchists. That sort of comes to a head in May 1937 in Barcelona. And since Orwell is associated with the wrong side, he gets persecuted. He has to leave Spain and then writes his book about it. So Paul Preston's take on Orwell, which is a really good one, is like Orwell is a great writer, but he just didn't have the whole picture. However, How Much Catalonia comes out in 38. I think 2 years or 3 years later, in 40 41, he writes Looking Back on the Spanish War, which is a super interesting essay that should always be read in conjunction with How Much to Catalonia, in which he basically comes to say, yeah, no, right, things happened in Spain, but we were fighting fascism. So he sort of puts it back into that bigger picture that sometimes is left out a bit in Homage to Catalonia. But for Orwell, like to be, and Peter Stansky, who was here a little bit earlier, can say much more about that. As Peter Stansky explained to me in an interview that I did with him for The Volunteer a couple of issues ago, for Orwell, it was much more important. Like Orwell was a socialist, right? Like he was an anti-fascist through and through, and his issues was with um, the methods employed sometimes by the CP, much less than with the overall opposition to fascism. Hemingway is a little bit the opposite. Hemingway saw the communists as incredibly efficient and disciplined and incredibly important for the war effort. So much so that when John Dos Passos' friend Jose Robles gets caught in the grind, right? Like Orwell did as well, and disappears, and Dos Passos goes in search for him. Hemingway tells him, like, stop it, man. There's a war going on. We have there's no time or space for crying over your friend. He probably was in the wrong time in the wrong place. Get over it, right? So Hemingway buys into the kind of the ruthless CP line of like, we got to win the war, and whatever means are necessary to do that, they whatever the goal justifies the means, basically, right? Um, so in that sense, I think it's interesting too, as Alex said, that Jordan is a communist, he fights with the communists because they know how to do this, right? And that ruthlessness that you see in the beginning, where he shoots his friend, and the kind of sense like what Alex said, like, if I disobey, I will be shot. It's not like, and I hate it. No, he's like, this is how things go. Things go in a war, right? You disobey orders, you get shot. Alex, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, and in fact, after the particular, it's a real battle the novel is based upon, that the film then is based upon, and after that battle that the Republicans lost, General Goltz, the real General Goltz, General Walter, really did have some people shot. Right, he sort of scapegoated some people and had them shot. So when Hemingway wrote that line, Robert Jordan saying, "I would be shot if I don't do what I'm supposed to do," he really thought. I mean, that was true. Like that's historically accurate. That he would just be scapegoated and executed by the general too. The big debate in Hemingway circles is because in For Whom the Bell Tolls, Jordan will several times essentially say, "No one can censor my thinking. I'm with the party line right now to win the war, but no one can control what I'm thinking. And after the war, I can express myself better." People don't know if that's what Hemingway felt in the moment or if that was revisionism on Hemingway's part. Like was Hemingway snookered, or was he really sort of thinking, I have to stomach this for now? And the Robert Jordan character in the book is fascinating because at the beginning of the war, when people like General like when the Fifth Regiment is killing some of its own, Robert Jordan says that's okay. Like if somebody's going to be yellow, somebody's going to be a coward, we should kill him on the battlefield, even on our side. At one point, Robert Jordan admits to shooting two unarmed prisoners. At one point, this is part excise in the novel, he offers to his Russian handler to kill another American journalist. Like what? Who is this savage Robert Jordan? And he is not the Gary Cooper we see in the film at all, right? So again, my plug for the novel is just being so complicated, and fascinating.
Great, thank you, Alex.
Great.
Let's do one more question, Dennis, maybe, and then
Okay,
circle
great.
back.
Yeah, I think yeah. Mark Shanker had a question related to Mr. Cooper himself. Mark, you can answer your question of the panelists now if you'd like.
What was Gary Cooper's politics at the time the movie was made, and then later, after post World War II?
I don't know, Alex, do you know?
I have no, like I said, I'm not a film scholar. Like I know a little bit about this film, but I don't know Gary Cooper's politics at all. I mean, he and Hemingway were buddies, right? And really, Hemingway's politics, people often say like that the gypsies have the right idea, which is no government. Like what Hemingway most hated was government interference in somebody's personal life to any extent. So he sort of moves to Cuba. He sort of tries to escape, the government wherever he is. I don't know if Cooper the cowboy shared that kind of sentiment at all. I don't know if somebody else knows who's more of a Cooper scholar or film scholar, if they know Cooper's politics.
Linda Early, can you unmute Linda, Dennis?
Yep, Linda, you should be able to speak now.
Okay, now I'm not a Cooper scholar, but I do know he was quite conservative. He was more in the John Wayne mode of being quite conservative politically at this point. And near the end of his life, he became more religious. Um, he also had an affair with Ingrid Bergman during the filming of this. They were both married to other people, but he had an affair. So, yeah, I don't think he was a great Spanish Civil War sympathizer or anything. I would not count on that.
That is Peter Cudner. You have your hand up?
Peter, you should be able to talk now. Peter? Should be able to speak now.
How about now? Yes.
Whoop, there you go.
The red sign went away. I've done some, I'm no scholar in anything. I work in the motion picture business and sort of obsessed with the blacklist because if they were to do it again, they could easily call me. And I actually wouldn't know what to do. But when that stuff started, Cooper was on the other side. Cooper was very anti-communist. When there were a lot of people in Hollywood were at least sympathetic, if not fellow travelers. They stood up and spoke for the Hollywood 10 and the people who were being blacklisted. Big names like Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. But there were a number of actors, Cooper among them, that were for the blacklist and staunchly anti-communist.
Along with Ronald Reagan.
Well, interestingly, Reagan as started a lot more liberal and was was a labor leader as an actor. He was one of the founders of the Screen Actors Guild. But he changed his tune, as one will do sometimes.
Thank you, Peter. That's great. This is maybe a good page that you have something to add. I saw you raise your hand briefly, but you're muted.
1 second. Paige,
Lana.
we can finish up with Paige. Give you the last word.
I was just going to say that Reagan's name appeared on the Americans for Democratic Action letterhead between Joe Rao and Walter Reuther. So just to follow up what Peter was saying, he was at one point almost an anti-communist liberal.
So this is a great segue, thanks, Peter and Paige, for me to plug again our next film session, which will cover The Fallen Sparrow. That'll be on July 24th at 4 p.m. Because John Garfield was, with Humphrey Bogart and Bacall, among the people who spoke out against HUAC's early targeting of Hollywood, right? And it's sort of the Committee for the First Amendment and stuff like that. And Garfield then went on almost simultaneously with Gary Cooper to play in this case, a veteran of the Spanish Civil War. So there was a more alignment with his role in politics than with Cooper. And that's a kind of a fascinating contrast, I think. And then, of course, Garfield himself was dragged before HUAC in April 1951, where he pled collaboration, but then refused to name names. And he paid a very high price for that. Sydney, do you have something to add to that? But can you unmute Sydney Clemens, Dennis?
Sydney, you should be able to talk.
You have to turn your mic on.
Should get a prompt to unmute, Sydney. There you go.
Thank you. It feels to me that Pilar was at least one of the two heroes of this film. Her statement that she was the leader, not her husband, was a powerful and unpredictable statement from a Spanish woman or even an American woman at that time. And I don't think it can be understated. And her view of the situation in that film tends to be correct all the way through. She got it, and other people were lost in their corners of it. So I feel that it's important, especially for something that is set in the 1930s and shows a woman taking that kind of leadership, which of course we were always capable of, but we're not allowed to do. I think it's important for the women in our group today and for the men as well to get that.
Thank you, Sydney. That's a great, oh, sorry. Somebody else has one more thing to add? Do you see the raised hand, Dennis? Yep. Thank you, Sydney.
I think that it's interesting that you can contrast the role of Pilar with the role of the two women. I mean, one of them was such a traditional woman who did this incredibly unrealistic thing after she was raped at the hands of soldiers and watched her family killed before her. And the other one is this strong woman. And so maybe also reflects Hemingway's incredible ambivalence about women.
Good point.
I mean, if I could just throw in two things. I mean, a lot of Hemingway scholars think that Pilar is Hemingway's best female creation, right, of all his female characters. The second thing is, I think she was largely based on La Pasionaria, Dolores Ibárruri, who was this communist spokesperson who was very much, a very larger than life leader on the Republican side during the war. And I think the Pilar character reflects her a lot.
That's great. John, do you have something else to add?
We're John, but this is gonna be the last one. We're hitting the time wall or time gate. Yeah.
Just a quick note on Ronald Reagan. While he was president of the Screen Actors Guild, he was also in the payroll of the film industry and the FBI. He was a stool pigeon for the government and for the industry. And this is quite well known. I was the executive director of After Philadelphia for 30 years and other locals, and it's common knowledge that he was he was on the wrong side, even as president of the Screen Actors Guild, and working against it while he was leading it.
Thank you, John. But we'll talk more about the Hollywood Blacklist and HUAC in LA in less than a month. No, a little more than a month on July 24th. I want to thank everybody for coming and seeing the film and talking and for all the great comments. I learned a lot. Thank you, Alex, so much for sharing your incredible expertise with us. Congrats again on the Tim O'Brien biography. It's been great to have you. Hopefully we can have you again sometime. Just as a quick reminder, our next online event will be on June 25th at 3 p.m., which is our Pride Month event with a Spanish senator, Carla Antonelli, joining us from Madrid, even though she's from the Canary Islands. And that will be really exciting. So we hope to see you there. And if you can't make that, we hope to see you on July 24th to talk about John Garfield in The Fallen Sparrow. Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Mark, for organizing. Dennis, your great work behind the scenes always. And we hope to see you guys again soon. Have a great evening.